They called it basic training, but what the cast of Combat went through was anything but basic. Before the cameras even started rolling, they were already being pushed to their limits, handling real weapons, facing live fire, and stepping into situations that felt dangerously close to actual war. For some of them, it didn't end when the scene was over, because behind one of television's most iconic World War II series was a reality far darker than anyone watching at home ever knew. Accidents that were never fully explained, stories that were quietly buried, and cast members who carried the consequences long after the show became a success. Number 1. A war story that felt too real. When Combat premiered on ABC on October 2, 1962, it felt completely different from anything else on television. Instead of focusing on generals or big strategies, it followed a small group of American soldiers fighting through France after D-Day, men who were tired, vulnerable, and just trying to survive. The show stripped away the usual heroism and presented war in a much more human, unfiltered way. That realism came from its creator, Robert Pirosh, who had served as a combat infantryman in World War II and won an Academy Award for writing Battleground. He wanted the series to feel authentic, starting with a pilot called A Day in June in 1961. Originally titled Men in Combat, ABC later renamed it Combat and ordered a full season. Across 5 years, the show produced 152 episodes, becoming the longest-running World War II drama on television. Filmed mostly in black and white to enhance its gritty tone, it later shifted to color in its final 1967 season. At its core were Lieutenant Gil Hanley, Rick Jason, and Sergeant Chip Saunders, Vic Morrow, leading their men through a war that never felt safe or predictable. Number 2. Training that felt closer to war than acting. Before filming even began, the cast of Combat went through a week-long boot camp at Fort Ord in Northern California, and it was anything but routine. The training pushed them to the edge. They crawled under barbed wire while live .50 caliber bullets were fired overhead, handled real grenades, ran brutal obstacle courses, and swung across muddy water pits on ropes. Rick Jason later admitted it was tougher than anything he experienced during his actual service in the Army Air Corps. The instructors made one thing clear: no over-the-top Hollywood acting. They were told to forget the John Wayne image and behave like real soldiers. What made it even more intense was that many of them didn't have to pretend. They had already lived through war. Rick Jason, born Richard Jacobson in 1923 in Brooklyn, served from 1943 to 1945. Though he originally aimed to become a pilot, he was reassigned to public relations after struggling with flight training requirements. He spent much of his time working with wounded soldiers in New York, later even teaching horseback riding in the Air Corps. That experience stayed with him, giving his performance as Lieutenant Gil Hanley a quiet authority that felt genuine rather than acted. Number 3, realism that went beyond the script. Combat kept its focus where it mattered most, on the soldiers in the field, not the commanders behind the lines. Creator Robert Pirosh pushed for accuracy in every detail. To get it right, the production brought in Major Homer Jones, a D-Day veteran from the 82nd Airborne, as a technical advisor. He reviewed scripts, corrected mistakes, and made sure the dialogue and behavior felt true to real infantrymen. The show also used authentic World War II weapons and vehicles whenever possible, adding a level of realism rarely seen on television at the time. It didn't stop there. When German soldiers or French civilians spoke, there were no subtitles, forcing viewers to rely on context, just like real troops would. The series also blended actual wartime footage with filmed scenes, making everything feel even more immediate. And for many of the actors, it wasn't just performance. Vic Morrow had served in the Navy, while Pierre Jalbert had trained with the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, bringing a sense of lived experience that quietly shaped every scene. Number 4. The Men Behind the Uniforms. Vic Morrow, born in 1929 in the Bronx, took a rough path into the military. After dropping out of high school, he enlisted in the Navy at just 17, serving from 1947 to 1949. Although it was after World War II, that experience shaped the tough, disciplined presence he brought to combat. As Sergeant Chip Saunders, he carried the weight of leadership in every scene, an intensity that earned him an Emmy nomination and made him one of the show's most unforgettable figures. Jack Hogan, who played PFC Kirby, brought his own military background to the role. Born in 1929, he served in the U.S. Air Force during the Korean War, reaching the rank of Staff Sergeant. Before that, he had already earned a pilot's license at 16. After his service, he studied drama at the Pasadena Playhouse. On screen, he balanced humor with toughness, making Kirby feel both real and relatable. Pierre Jalbert had a very different story. Born in 1925 in Quebec City, he wasn't a combat veteran but an accomplished athlete, Canada's national ski champion and captain of its 1948 Olympic team before an injury ended that path. His only military link was training with the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. He later worked as a film editor at MGM before being encouraged to audition for combat. Fluent in French, he fit perfectly as PFC Paul Cage Lemay, the squad's translator. After the show, he returned to editing and went on to work on major films like The Godfather, even earning an Emmy nomination for Shogun. Number 5. When realism came at a cost. The setting itself added to the weight of the story. The wide, empty landscapes didn't feel heroic. They felt bleak, like places where soldiers were simply sent to survive or die. Nothing about it was glamorous, and that raw atmosphere became a defining part of the show's identity. Off-camera, Vic Morrow brought that same intensity into real life. He wasn't just committed to his role, he fought for the people around him. At the start of Season 2, he even went on strike, demanding better dressing rooms for the entire cast. It wasn't about ego, it was about fairness. He also pushed for more focus on Sergeant Saunders, believing the character deserved deeper development. And eventually, he got it, becoming one of the highest-paid actors on television at the time. But that drive came with friction. Morrow often challenged producers over creative choices, determined to keep the show as authentic and powerful as possible. His methodical approach to acting made filming more demanding, both for himself and his co-stars. Some found him difficult, but many respected the standard he refused to lower, and the risks he was willing to take to get it right. Number 6. Behind-the-scenes limits of war. Even with expert guidance, the show wasn't perfect. Technical advisors carefully reviewed scripts to keep battle scenes realistic, but small inaccuracies still slipped through. Lieutenant Hanley's rifle was sometimes shown with a bayonet that didn't exist for that model, and soldiers were occasionally seen without spare magazines, something that would have been unthinkable in real combat. These details may seem minor, but they revealed the constant push and pull between authenticity and the limits of television production. Filming itself was no easier. Much of the show was shot outdoors in rough locations like Coral Winery in California, chosen for its resemblance to the European countryside. While it looked convincing on screen, conditions were far from comfortable. Cast and crew spent long hours in heavy uniforms, dealing with heat, mud, and rocky terrain while running, crawling, and performing physically demanding scenes. The production relied heavily on practical effects, real explosions, live gunfire, and minimal safety standards compared to today. Stuntmen often played multiple roles to save money, sometimes dying as one soldier and returning hours later in a different uniform. Despite the risks, the team pushed forward to create something as immersive as possible. At the same time, network rules placed strict limits on what could be shown. ABC allowed intense action but avoided graphic violence, meaning deaths were often implied rather than shown. Instead of relying on blood and spectacle, the series leaned into character, fear, and moral conflict, turning it into something deeper than just another war show. Number 7. Realism on screen, and where it fell short. Combat wasn't just another war series, it built its reputation on realism. The actors handled real World War II weapons like the M1 Garand, Thompson submachine gun, and Browning automatic rifle, adding a level of authenticity rarely seen on television at the time. But that realism came with a cost. Many of these weapons were heavy, making long filming days physically exhausting. To manage that, some adjustments had to be made. Rick Jason, who played Lieutenant Hanley, started out using a Thompson but switched to the lighter M1 carbine after just a couple of days. Vic Morrow also used a wooden replica of the Thompson in certain scenes to reduce the strain. While these changes made filming more practical, sharp-eyed viewers could sometimes spot the difference. The dedication to authenticity didn't stop there. Before filming began in 1962, the main cast went through a week of intense military training at Fort Ord in California. They crawled under live gunfire and even handled real grenades. Some later admitted that this training felt tougher than their actual time in the military. To keep everything grounded in reality, the production also brought in Major Homer Jones, a D-Day veteran, as a technical advisor, ensuring that, even with limitations, the show stayed as close to real combat as possible. Number 8. Clashing styles behind the scenes. On screen, their partnership worked. Off-screen, it was more complicated. Rick Jason and Vic Morrow approached acting in completely different ways. Jason was controlled and methodical, while Morrow relied on instinct and raw emotion. That contrast sometimes created tension during filming, especially as Morrow began taking a more active role in directing certain episodes. The rivalry was never explosive, but it was always there. They respected each other's work, yet never became close. Their personalities simply didn't align, and strangely, that tension became part of what made combat so compelling. Hanley and Saunders weren't just characters, they reflected that same divide: strategy versus instinct, control versus survival. That contrast gave the series an edge that kept audiences hooked for 5 seasons. Number 9. When acting crossed into real danger. Vic Morrow didn't just play Sergeant Saunders, he lived the role. A firm believer in method acting, he stayed in character even between takes, carrying that same intensity off camera. He also insisted on doing his own stunts, no matter how risky they were. In one scene involving live explosions, a blast went off too close, sending debris flying past him. He walked away unharmed, but those on set said it shook him. Still, he never backed down. He believed that kind of realism made the show stronger. Rick Jason, on the other hand, approached things very differently. At first, he wasn't even sure the role would work, questioning whether audiences wanted another war drama. But combat quickly proved him wrong, becoming ABC's longest-running World War II series. His portrayal of Lieutenant Hanley brought calm and control to the screen, a steady contrast to Morrow's raw, unpredictable energy. Number 10. A tragedy that shook Hollywood. But the danger didn't end with combat. Years later, Vic Morrow became part of one of the most devastating accidents in film history. On July 23, 1982, he was filming Twilight Zone, the movie in California, shooting a Vietnam War scene where his character was meant to rescue 2 young children while running through a river beneath a helicopter. The sequence was packed with explosions, but behind the scenes, critical safety measures were being overlooked. The 2 children, Micah Din Lei, 7, and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, 6, had been hired illegally and were filming late at night near dangerous effects without proper supervision. Then, around 2:30 a.m., a mistimed explosion struck the helicopter's rotor. The aircraft lost control and crashed directly onto the actors below. In an instant, the scene turned into a real-life nightmare. Morrow and one of the children were killed on impact, while the other child was fatally injured. The shock of what happened left the entire crew, and eventually Hollywood itself, grappling with the consequences of a tragedy that should never have happened. Number 11. Rick Jason's final chapter. Even as his career slowed down, Rick Jason never drifted far from his combat family. He continued attending reunions, reconnecting with the people who had shaped one of the most important chapters of his life. His final public appearance came in October 2000 at a reunion in Las Vegas. Just a week later, at the age of 77, he died by suicide, leaving fans stunned by the sudden and quiet end to his story. Away from the spotlight, Jason lived a creative and curious life. He painted, sculpted, played guitar, and even bred tropical fish. His passion for fine wine led him to open a business called the Wine Locker, catering to collectors who needed specialized storage. But for audiences, he would always remain Lieutenant Gil Hanley, the steady leader who brought humanity to the chaos of war. His passing marked the end of an era, but his work continues to keep those stories alive for generations that never saw the war firsthand. Number 12. A war story that outlived its time. Even after it ended, combat had already secured its place in television history. From October 1962 to March 1967, the series ran for 152 episodes, most in black and white, with only its final 25 episodes filmed in color. That shift came late, but by then, the show had already built its identity through a raw, documentary-like style. What made it even more remarkable was its timeline. The entire series was set between D-Day in 1944 and early 1945, less than a year of real history stretched across 5 full seasons. Despite that narrow window, the show kept finding new stories to tell, never losing its intensity or depth. Other war dramas from the same era didn't last nearly as long. While similar shows faded quickly, Combat stood out for its realism and its focus on the emotional weight of war, not just the action. Its influence carried forward, setting a standard that later series would try to match. After the show ended, Rick Jason continued acting, but gradually stepped back from the spotlight. He appeared in a few projects, including Color Me Dead and guest roles on television, before turning his attention to writing. In 2000, he published Scrapbooks of My Mind, offering a personal look at his career, especially the years that defined him on Combat. That's a wrap for this video. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video drops. See you next time.